Karen Marsh did not cry when they put her belongings on the porch. She stood very straight in the cold October light, her hands folded in front of her, and she watched two men she had fed breakfast to that same morning carry her trunk down the front steps of Marshfield as though it weighed nothing at all. They called her a liar. They called her a woman who had disgraced a good name. They called her, within her own hearing, a mistake that had finally been corrected. She said nothing. In her hand she held her wedding ring, warm from her own skin, and she did not put it back on. The household had gathered on the lawn to watch. Cook stood with her apron twisted in both fists. The stable boys would not meet her eyes. Nobody moved to stop it, and nobody moved to help her, and the silence of 40 people doing nothing was its own kind of verdict. On the porch, at the top of the steps, stood the man she had married. Duke Marsh did not shout. He did not accuse her again, though the letter that had condemned her sat folded in his coat pocket, close enough to his heart that she could see its shape through the wool. He simply stood there, tall and still, his jaw set, his hands at his sides, and he watched them load his wife into a wagon and did not say a single word to stop it. She set the ring on the porch rail, gently, the way a person sets down something that is no longer theirs to carry. Not a scene, not a plea, just a ring on a rail, and a woman climbing into a wagon on her own 2 feet. The wagon pulled away down the long drive between the tobacco rows, and Karen kept her back straight the entire way, because she had already decided that no one on that lawn would see her break. 5 years later, in a ballroom strung with harvest lanterns, that same stillness would settle over Duke Marsh's face again. This time, he would not stay silent. Virginia, in the autumn of 1841, in a county that measured a woman's worth by the name on her marriage lines, and had already decided Karen Marsh had none left worth keeping. If a story like hers is the kind that keeps you watching to the end, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't lose this one halfway through. The house Crane had shown Duke into that morning, 5 years ago, had been full of a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a man reading a letter twice, because he could not make himself believe it the first time. Silas Crane had stood at his elbow the whole while, solemn as a churchman, and had said the words that would end a marriage in fewer than 20 of them. "I did not want to be the one to bring it to you," Crane said, "but you asked me to manage what your father could not." Duke had not asked to see proof beyond the letter. Grief does that to a man. His father had been 6 months in the ground, the estate 3 seasons behind on its debts, and here was one more thing collapsing in his hands. And he had not had the strength left to ask a single hard question. He had let his silence answer for him. He did not know, and would not know for 5 years, that the woman in the wagon had been carrying his children. Elderslie sat 2 counties over, a river town of millers and merchants who did not know or care whose wife Karen Marsh had once been. She arrived there with $11, a trunk and Hetty Combs, who had been Marshfield's housekeeper for 30 years, and had walked off the property the same afternoon, rather than stay in a house that had done what it did. "I am too old to work for people who do that to a decent woman," Hetty had said, setting her own bag down beside Karen's on the road, and that had been the entire conversation. By the time the twins were born, in the coldest February anyone in Elderslie could remember, Karen had already taken in her first ledger to balance, for a dry goods merchant who could not make his own columns agree. She had not told him her married name. She called herself Karen Ashby, her mother's name, and she kept the children's true father a fact, folded as small and close as that letter had once sat in his coat. Henry and June grew up knowing their mother counted for a living, and never once heard her complain about it. By the 5th year, Corinne Ashby was the best ledger-keeper in 3 counties, and nobody in Elderslie knew it had cost her a marriage to become one. 2 counties away, Duke Marsh had spent those same 5 years putting Marshfield back together with his own 2 hands, paying off debts a field at a time, and keeping Silas Crane on as his agent because his father, dying, had asked him to. He had not remarried. He had not in 5 years smiled in any way that reached his eyes. It was Crane who arranged the merger with the Pruitt Mills, and Crane who arranged the marriage that would seal it, and it was Crane, though no one in that county yet knew it, who needed both to happen quickly, before anyone thought to look too closely at where the Mills' missing income had gone. The Pruitts needed their books audited before the wedding contracts were signed. Adelaide Pruitt's father, a careful man, insisted on it. "Get the woman from Elderslie," he told his daughter. "Ashby, they say she can find a missing dollar in a ledger the size of a Bible." Adelaide had never heard the name Karen Marsh in her life. Neither had her father. That was the arrangement Corinne accepted. A fee, a fortnight, and no questions about who she used to be. She did not know, when she said yes, whose wedding she was being hired to make honest. The Pruitt counting house smelled of beeswax and old paper, and Corinne liked it instantly, the way she liked any room where numbers were the only thing that mattered. She spread 5 years of ledgers across the long table, and began where she always began, at the beginning, page 1, before anyone's opinion of the numbers could get in her way. By the 2nd day she found the first thing that did not sit right. A column of freight charges, paid to a warehouse that did not appear anywhere else in the mill's records. She did not say anything to anyone. She copied the figures into her own notebook, in her own hand, the way she had learned to do years ago, quietly and twice. Not a mistake. Not carelessness. A pattern, and patterns did not happen by accident. She was still bent over the ledger, a pencil behind her ear, and June asleep on a folded shawl in the corner, because there had been no one to leave the children with that morning, when the door opened, and a voice she had not heard in 5 years said her name. Not the name she used now. Corinne, she looked up. Duke Marsh stood in the doorway of the Pruitt counting house, hat in hand, and for 3 full seconds neither of them said anything at all. Henry, 4 years old and utterly unbothered by adult silence, looked up from the floor where he had been stacking wooden spools and said, "Are you lost, sir?" Duke did not answer him. He was looking at the boy's face, and then at the sleeping girl on the shawl, and something in his own expression that had not moved in 5 years. "Moved, I was told the ledger-keeper's name was Ashby," he said finally. "It is," Corinne said. "It was my mother's name. I use it now. Why, it was not a question asked gently. It was the question of a man who had spent 5 years assuming he already knew the answer, and was only now realizing he might not. Because the name Marsh was taken from me on your own porch," she said, "and I did not think I had any right left to keep it." He flinched. It was small, a tightening at the corner of his mouth, gone almost before it arrived. But she saw it, because she had spent 2 years of her life learning exactly what that particular stillness in him meant. "I have work to finish, Miss Marsh," she said, and turned back to the ledger, because there was nothing else in that room she trusted herself to say. He did not leave. He stood by the door a long moment, watching the back of her bent head, and something that was almost a smile, the first in 5 years, moved and died at the corner of his mouth before he caught himself. He came back the next day, and the day after that, always with some thin excuse about the merger papers. And each time he found some reason to stay in the room a little longer than the papers required. "You've circled the freight account," he said on the third visit, looking over her shoulder at the ledger without asking permission. "I have. Why?" "Because it doesn't exist anywhere else," Corinne said. "A warehouse that receives payment and ships nothing. That is not an accounting error, Mr. Marsh. That is a hole someone dug on purpose." He was quiet a moment. "Crane manages the mill accounts." "I know. You knew that before you circled it. I did." She did not look up. "I have been finding his handwriting in other people's numbers for 5 years. I would know it with my eyes closed. That night, when he offered, carefully, the way a man offers something he expects to be refused, to settle a sum on her so she would not need to keep taking in other people's ledgers to live, she set down her pencil and looked at him directly for the first time since the counting-house door had opened. "I did not come back into your life to be rescued," she said. "I came back to do a job I was hired for, and I am going to finish it whether or not you approve of how I make my living. That isn't what I meant. It is exactly what you meant," she said, not unkindly. "And I am telling you, so there is no confusion later, I left Marshfield with nothing, and I built this with my own hands, and I would rather starve honestly than be managed generously. There is a difference." He studied her for a long moment, and the almost smile came back, further this time, staying a full second longer before it vanished. "You've gotten harder to argue with," he said. "I always was," Corinne said. "You simply never had to." He did not offer the money again. But he came back the next evening anyway, without an excuse this time, and sat across the table while she worked, saying nothing, only watching her hands move down the columns as though the sight of her doing careful, exact, difficult things was its own kind of peace he had not known he needed. Neither of them said anything about the letter still folded in a drawer at Marshfield. Neither of them said anything, yet, about the 2 children asleep on the shawl in the corner, who had his eyes and her stubborn chin, and who called Duke Marsh nothing at all, because they did not yet know who he was. The Pruitt Harvest Ball was meant to announce the merger to the county, and everyone understood, without it being said aloud, that it would likely announce an engagement as well. Adelaide Pruitt wore blue silk and stood near the punch table, practising a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, and her mother, Mrs. Pruitt, moved through the room like a woman inspecting livestock. Corinne was there in a plain grey dress at the edge of the room, because the final audit papers needed one more signature before the merger contracts could be read aloud, and the Pruitts had asked her to bring them herself. Mrs. Pruitt found her by the window. "I know who you are," she said, low enough that only Corinne could hear. "Marsh's runaway wife. I wonder that you have the nerve to stand in this room." The room around them did not go silent, but several heads turned, the way heads always turn toward the smell of a scene about to happen. Corinne did not raise her voice. "I stood in this county once and let people believe whatever letter was put in front of them," she said. "I am not that woman any more. I balanced your husband's mill accounts down to the penny in a fortnight, when your own bookkeeper could not do it in a year. If you would like to discuss my nerve, Mrs. Pruitt, I would be glad to discuss it in the light of what I have actually done, rather than what I was once accused of." She did not raise her chin to make it dramatic. She simply said it, the way she said every true thing, plainly, and let it stand. Mrs. Pruitt's mouth opened, and found nothing ready to say. It was Duke who crossed the room then, and the crowd noticed that too, the county's coldest man, walking toward the woman half of them had spent 5 years calling a disgrace, and stopping at her side in front of everyone. She found $4,000 your own agents missed, he said, to the room generally, though his eyes stayed on Corinne. I would think twice before questioning her nerve. Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. The room recalibrated the way a room does when the man everyone defers to has just told them, without raising his voice, who deserves their respect. Adelaide Pruitt, watching from the punch table, understood something the rest of the room had not yet worked out, and her practised smile finally slipped all the way off her face. The work that followed the ball happened mostly at night, in the Pruitt counting house, with a single lamp burning low and the two of them bent over the same table until the columns blurred. "Tell me what happened," Corinne said one night in November, not looking up from the page. "The letter. I want to hear you say it." Duke was quiet a long time. "Crane brought it to me the morning after my father's burial fell, 3 months behind us," he said. "I had not slept properly in a season. He said you had written it yourself, to a man in Richmond, and that you had confessed everything to him privately, out of shame, and asked him to spare you the scene of telling me yourself. And you believed him. I did not have anything left in me to disbelieve him with," Duke said. "That is not an excuse. It is only the truth." "There's a difference," Corinne said quietly, "between an excuse and an explanation. I would like to hear the rest of it anyway." He told her the rest, how he had gone to the porch to stop it, and stood there instead. Because some old cowardly part of him had reasoned that if she truly had betrayed him, watching her go without a word was the only dignity he had left to keep. He told her he had kept her ring in the same drawer as the letter for 5 years, unable to throw either one away. She listened without interrupting, her hands still on the ledger, and when he finished she said only, "I never wrote that letter. I know that now. I knew it then too," she said. "I have known it every day for 5 years. It took you longer." He reached across the table and, for the first time since the porch, took her hand. She let him. "There are 2 children asleep in the next room," she said, "who are yours. I did not tell you, because by the time I knew, you had already let me leave without a word. And I decided I would rather raise them believing their mother chose her own life than let them grow up in a house that had once done what yours did to me." Duke did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had gone rough. "What are their names?" "Henry," she said, "and June." He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them there was something in his face that had not been there in 5 years. Not the almost smile this time, but its whole, unguarded original. The freight account discrepancy, traced patiently through 5 years of copied entries, led exactly where Corinne had suspected it would from the first afternoon, to a warehouse account controlled entirely by Silas Crane, drawing steadily off the mill's income under cover of the merger paperwork he himself had drafted. She had barely finished copying the last figure into her notebook when the trouble came looking for her instead. A constable arrived at the counting house 3 days later with a warrant sworn by Crane himself, accusing Corinne Ashby of embezzling from the Pruitt accounts she had been hired to audit. "He's moved first," Duke said, when he found her standing in the doorway with the paper still in her hand. "He knows you're close. He's trying to discredit you before you can finish. Then we will simply have to finish faster than he can ruin me," Corinne said through her hands, for the first time in 5 years. "We're not quite steady. Worse followed within the week." Crane, cornered and desperate, went further than either of them expected. He called on Mrs. Pruett privately and told her, with a great show of reluctant sorrow, that the ledger-keeper she had trusted with her family's fortune was not only a suspected thief, but an unmarried mother twice over, passing off another man's children as respectable, and that the county deserved to know precisely who it had welcomed into its parlours. He meant it to end her. He did not yet know it would end him instead. Judge Emery Slate convened the hearing in the Elderslie courthouse on a grey December morning, and half the county came to watch, packing the benches the way people pack a church for a funeral or a hanging, uncertain yet which one this would turn out to be. Crane stood first, composed, a folder of documents in hand, and laid out his accusation with the smoothness of a man who had been lying skilfully for a very long time. Then it was Corinne's turn. She did not raise her voice. She laid out 5 years of copied entries, dated in her own hand, matched line by line against the Pruett originals, and set beside them the freight warehouse ledger that did not exist anywhere except in Crane's own bookkeeping. Every entry I copied twice, she said, once into my private notebook, and once left untouched in the original. That habit is not proof of guilt, Your Honour. It is proof of exactly the opposite. A thief does not keep a second honest copy of the evidence against himself. Crane's composure cracked for the first time when Duke rose. 5 years ago, Duke said, and the courthouse went utterly still. This man showed me a letter and told me my wife had written it. I did not ask to see her handwriting compared against it. I did not ask a single question I should have asked. I let her leave my house believing I had chosen to believe a stranger's word over hers, and I have spent 5 years living with what that silence cost us both. He turned and looked at Crane directly. I would like the letter examined now, he said, the one still in my possession, against anything in his hand that this court can find. It took the clerk less than 20 minutes to lay the two side by side. The slant of the letters, the particular closed loop of a certain hand's lowercase g, matched Crane's ledger entries exactly, and did not match Corinne's hand at all. Crane did not wait for the judge to finish reading the comparison aloud. He put both hands flat on the table in front of him, and, in a voice gone suddenly small, said he would sign whatever confession the court required if his family's name might be spared the worst of it. Judge Slate looked at him a long moment. You will make full restitution, he said, and you will leave this county before spring, and you will consider that mercy, Misty, Crane, because you have earned considerably less. Crane did not argue. The courthouse emptied slowly into a cold, bright afternoon, and Corinne stood on the steps a moment, feeling 5 years of weight finally, actually leave her shoulders. Duke found her there. I owe you a conversation I should have had 5 years ago, he said. You've had it, Corinne said, in front of the whole county, which was rather more than I expected, not that one. He reached into his coat and drew out something small, wrapped in a handkerchief gone soft with age, her ring, the one she had left on the porch rail. I want to ask you properly this time, not because a letter told me to feel something, and not because I have anything left to lose by asking honestly. Ask then, marry me again, he said, not the version of me who stood on a porch and said nothing. I am asking as the man who spent 5 years learning what his silence cost, and who does not intend to be silent again about anything that matters. Corinne looked at the ring a long moment before she looked at him. I did not come back for a rescue, she said. I want that understood, still, even now. I'm not offering one, Duke said. I'm offering a life. Those are different things. She held out her hand, and he slid the ring back onto her finger himself, and for the second time in 5 years, The corner of his mouth moved, except this time it did not stop at almost. It became, plainly and completely, a smile. The first real one the county had seen on him in half a decade. And somewhere behind them on the courthouse steps, Henry announced to no one in particular that he had known all along the man was not lost. Marshfield healed the way land always heals when it is finally tended by people who mean to stay. The mill accounts, run properly for the first time in years, turned a profit by the second harvest, and the freight warehouse that had once hidden Crane's theft became, at Corinne's insistence, a schoolhouse instead. She named it the Ashby Ledger School, over Duke's gentle objection that it ought to carry the Marsh name. "I built it under the name I earned it with," she told him, and that was the end of the argument. Girls from 3 counties came to learn accounts there, taught by a woman the same neighbours had once refused to look at directly, and Mrs. Pruitt, 2 years on, sent her own granddaughter to sit in its front row, and stood afterward on the schoolhouse steps and said, stiffly but sincerely, that she had misjudged a great many things about Karen Marsh, and was sorry for it. Adelaide Pruitt married a shipping merchant from Norfolk the following spring, and wrote, on occasion, cheerful letters that made no mention at all of the wedding that had once nearly been hers. Henry and June grew up knowing every ledger column in Marshfield's counting house before they knew their letters properly, and grew up too watching their father's face thaw a little more each season, until the almost smile was simply, ordinarily, his smile, worn easily, the way a man wears something he no longer has to guard. Silas Crane was never seen in the county again. Duke Marsh kept the drawer where the forged letter had once lived, but he kept it empty now, and told Corinne once, without any particular sadness, that an empty drawer felt like the truest kind of ending a story like theirs could have. Karen Marsh, she used the name freely now, the way a person wears a coat that finally fits again, stood many evenings at the schoolhouse window and watched girls half her age learn to make their own columns balance, and thought, not often but sometimes, of a woman who had once climbed into a wagon with $11 and a straight spine, and nothing else certain in the world. That was the whole of it. And it was enough. And it was everything. She had never once asked the county to see her clearly. She had simply kept doing the work until it could no longer look away. If her story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which moment finally convinced you Duke deserved her back. The courthouse steps, the ring on the porch rail, or the schoolhouse he once objected to naming after her. And tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Another one is waiting for you next.